Om. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Satgurum Brahma Vidvaram Namah Shri Shankarananda Gurupadambu Janmane Savila Samaha Graha Grasaika Karmane. Right? So let's read the verses we covered last time. Verses 18 to 21. Saveti vedyam tat sarvam nānyastasyāsti vedita vidita viditabhyam tata prithak bodhaswarupakam bodhepyunubhavo yasya nakathanchana jayate tam katham bodhayet shastram loshtam narasamakritim jivha mesti na chet yuktihi lajjaye kevalam yatha na buddhyate maya bodhaha bodhavya iti tadrishi yasmin yasmin asti loke bodhastattadupekshane yadbodhamatram tad brahma ityevam dhir brahma nishchayaha. So last week we saw now further that the self is that which is different from what is known, and it is different from the unknown in verse number 18. Now, can you think of something that is not known, but it is not unknown? So it's not known means we don't know it, but it's not unknown means it's not that we don't know it. So these contradictions are given in the Upanishads to tell us that the self is that which is not known as an object, but it is different or not unknown because it is a subject. So it is I. It is not known, meaning it is not, another way to look at it, it is not known, meaning it is not knowledge, and it is not unknown, it is not ignorance. Why? Because something that's known in the field of objects can become unknown. We can forget about it. And something that's unknown can be known. But the self is that which illumines both knowledge and ignorance. It is not known, meaning it is not manifest by the senses. It is not unknown, meaning it is not the unmanifest. It is not that ignorance which is unmanifest. It's that which illumines both. So our Upanishads give us these beautiful mantras to reflect deeper on what the self actually is. So the self knows all that is knowable in verse number 18, and there's no one to know the self because the self is as it is. It is self-aware. So after discussing all of these beautiful things about the self and saying that the self is ever experienced, it's ever experienced because it has to be there before anything. There's a beautiful verse in Sanskrit. I'm going to read it to you. and then I'll explain you the meaning. Let's see where it is. Okay, here it is. Pramata cha pramanam cha prameyam pramitistatha yasya prasadat siddhyanti tat siddhau kim apekshate. This verse is very beautiful. Pramata means the knower, the ego knower, Pramanam means the means of knowledge. Prameya means that which is known, and pramiti is the knowledge that we get. So for example, I am the knower, right? I am using the eyes, the means of knowledge, right? To see what? To see the screen. So the screen is the object of knowledge. And when I, the knower, I'm using my eyes to see the screen, which is an object, that I gain knowledge. I gain knowledge of what is happening. So in these four, the knower, the means of knowledge, the known, and the knowledge, all of that, how is that illumined? It is illumined by I. So what this verse is saying, it's so silly that we're trying to prove I. We're trying to prove the self, but without the self, we cannot know. We cannot use any means of knowledge. We cannot know any object. We cannot have the process of knowledge. So we are trying to use a means of knowledge to prove the self, but the self is the one that proves the means of knowledge. So you see how absurd this is? Without I, there is no seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. Without I, there is no thinking. Without I, there's no questioning or doubting. And I'm using all of these means of knowledge to prove I. But without I, they don't exist. So therefore, Swami Vidyāraṇya ji says, it is so obvious that the self is ever experienced. And because all of these things are happening, know that they're only possible because of the self. And if someone still doesn't understand this, he says that it is like a person who is a form of clay. Like, how can the person not get it that the self is ever experienced as I? And he said, it is like saying in verse 20, it's like saying, somebody's saying, I don't know if I have a tongue. They're doubting if they have a tongue, but you need the tongue to doubt that you have a tongue. And you're saying you don't know if you have a tongue. So it's like I say that I don't know consciousness, but I need to be conscious in order to say I don't know consciousness. So he says it's really, really absurd that we're doubting consciousness because we are conscious beings. So how can we even doubt that? Then he goes on to say, if somebody insists that I get what you're saying, but I want to experience the self. I want to experience the self. So very beautifully in verse 21, he says, look, the self is ever experienced, but let me tell you something. We are not in tune with that experience. We've not paid attention to that experience. And how do we do it? Consciousness plus object equals thought. So as long as there's consciousness illumining an object, there's going to be so many thoughts coming. The object can be a gross object, like a book, like a bottle, like a computer, or the object can be an emotion. Whenever consciousness is illumining something, then thoughts come into play. And when thoughts come into play, we're not able to pay attention to consciousness. It is like in a book, when we see so many words, we don't pay attention to the page beneath the book. So he says, remove those objects. Remove those objects, not forcefully, but defocus from those objects. Defocus from those objects in the mind and turn within. And when we defocus from any object that the mind is grasping onto and we turn within, then we rest in the self. We rest in our own self. There is what Puja Gurudev or Swami Chinmayanandaji, he called objectless awareness. This objectless awareness is the self as it is. Right now, we are experiencing the self amidst thoughts, amidst words, amidst actions, amidst things. But when we are sitting quietly, we are attuned to the experience of the self as it is, that objectless awareness. So, if somebody says, I want to experience that, well, it's ever experienced, but here's how we can be in tune with it, or here's how it is most evident. Here's how it is most evident, so much so that one will never doubt that, yes, I am that self. So this is what it means to defocus from the object, that objectless awareness. That is Dihi Brahma Nishchaya. That is the determination of the nature of Brahman. So this much we saw last time. Now he's going to go into answering the question of that objector, the Purva Pakshin. He's now going to go directly to him and answer his question. Because remember, what the question was is, okay, I am not these 5 sheets, but there's nothing there. I don't experience anything. And our answer was, well, if you say, I don't experience anything, there must be an experiencer. Therefore, there is something. And that something is of the nature of consciousness, but we feel we don't experience it because everything we experience is objectified. But the self is the very subject. And that's why we're not able to grasp that experience. It is only evident in the non-grasping. But furthermore, let me tell you exactly about this self. So verse number 22 now. Pancha-kosha parityage, Pancha-kosha parityage, sākṣī bodhāvasheshatah, sākṣī bodhāvasheshatah, swasvarupa sa eva syāt, swasvarupa sa eva syāt, śūnyatvam tasya durgatam, śūnyatvam tasya durgatam, pancha-kosha parityage, sākṣī bodhāvasheshatah, swasvarupa sa eva syāt, śūnyatvam tasya durgatam. So now he says, Pancha-kosha parityage means by dismissing or by letting go of the 5 sheets, sākṣī bodhāvasheshatah. What remains, avasheshatah, is sākṣī, the witness. The witness remains. Sākṣī bodha, that pure witness remains. Swasvarupa sa eva syāt, that is the real nature of the self. Śūnyatvam tasya durgatam, non-existence or śūnyatvam cannot be attributed to it. Tasya, of that consciousness, non-existence cannot be attributed to it. By dismissing the objective element, the 5 sheets, what remains is the witness of the 5 sheets. That is the real nature of the self, and non-existence cannot be attributed to it. So here, dismissing the 5 sheets doesn't mean that I get rid of them. It means that I let go of the identification with them. Because a realized being also has 5 sheets, right? Also has 5 sheets, but they're not identified with it. So when we say dismissing the 5 sheets means I let go of my identification of I in the body, I in the pranas, I in the mind, I in the intellect, and I in that anandamaya kosha, that ignorance. I let go of that identification. And for the reasons that we gave before in the very beginning, that of course the body is impermanent. It's impermanent. The pranas, we might think that the pranas are permanent because they keep going and going. We keep breathing. That is true, but they are inert. They're insentient. They're not conscious. The mind, we saw that it keeps changing. It has a lot of vikaras. So that cannot be me. And the intellect, we saw that the intellect gets dissolved in deep sleep, right? It gets dissolved in deep sleep. That cannot be me. And the anandamaya kosha, even that bliss sheath is not me, because that bliss sheath is impermanent. And it has gradations of priya, moda, pramoda. So we examine these in the very beginning. So he says, now let go of them. And when you let go of the identification with them, what is left is called sākṣī. Sākṣī means consciousness. That innermost consciousness, pratyagatma. And how the word sākṣī is derived is sakshat ikshate, means it directly illumines. What is this direct illumination? You see, when we know things through the mind or the senses, it is an indirect illumination. It is also a tired, very tiring, effortful illumination. When I am knowing things through my eyes, right? Of course, I need consciousness. So it's indirect. It's not indirect in one way, but it's actually indirect because I still need consciousness. And when I'm knowing things through my eyes, there's an effort there. There's an effort of seeing. And in that seeing, there's a tiredness that comes. We can only see for so long. After a while of looking at the screen, the eyes get dry and tired. I don't want to see anymore, right? We have these expressions. The hearing, it's a means. We can hear through the ears, but even that is illumined by consciousness. And they get tired. We get tired hearing. We have this expression, I'm tired of hearing all this. I don't want to hear it anymore, right? So with seeing, with hearing, it's indirect, although we call it direct, and it's effortful and tiring. Even with thinking, when we're thinking about something, it's an effort. I have to think. And at some point we say, I'm brain dead. Oh, I can't think anymore. This is too much for me, right? So we have these expressions in our language, which means there's an effort, there's a exhaustion in using these instruments. But when it comes to sākṣī, it's an effortless illumination because it doesn't need anything. To see, consciousness has to go through the mind, then through the eyes, then only I see. To hear, consciousness has to go through the mind and then to the ears, then only I hear. But to illumine, consciousness doesn't need anything. To illumine itself, to know that I am there, it doesn't need anything. It doesn't need to go through the mind and through the eyes, through the mind, through the ear. To know myself, it is an illumination that does not require any instrument of knowledge. It's self-luminous. So it's a direct illumination. Sākṣī. Sākṣī. And the beauty about that sākṣī is the illuminator is different from the illumined, right? So somebody says, so what if I'm sākṣī? Remember that that which illumines is different from the illumined. The ultimate seer is different from the seen. So I am the seer and this is the seen. So if the seen is a rectangle and blue and red, does the seer become that? No. If the seen, if the thoughts are sad, upset, happy, do I become that? No. The seer is different from the seen. Therein lies freedom. When we know that seer is different from the seen. Once I read somewhere that sadness is very peculiar. It's very peculiar because if we do enough inquiry into sadness, then nobody can become sad. Why? If somebody tells you and says, you are sad today, you would say, well, you don't even know. You don't know me. So how can you know that I'm sad? Right? Doesn't make sense. But if I feel sad today, then I am aware that I am sad. So I cannot be sad because I am aware of that sadness. So if somebody tells me that I am sad, I am not sad. If I am aware that I am sad, I am not sad. So either way, sadness cannot be in me. Sadness is happening because I am not inquiring into it. That's why there is sadness. Sadness is not happening because it's actually happening. Sadness is happening as a lack of inquiry. So sākṣī means that I am just as I am. I don't need anything to illumine me. It's a direct illumination and I am unaffected by all of that. The thing with us is we only pay attention when things cry out to us. Otherwise, we don't pay attention. Sometimes a child is neglected, but when they cry, then we pay attention. And our body, we don't really feel our body. Not like we think about our legs and our arms and our hands every day, or our teeth and our tongue. But when something pains, then we notice, oh my gosh, I do have legs. They hurt. When the back pains, I do have a back. It hurts, right? So we only notice things when they cry out. That's a problem with us. But Ātman's never going to cry out. It doesn't have a voice. So it's hard to notice it. It's hard to notice it. It takes a special tool, subtle tool to really go with it. So we are that sākṣī. Swaswarupa sa eva syat. And that sākṣī is our nature. That sākṣī is Brahman. And it cannot be śūnyam. It cannot be non-existence because I exist. I exist. That consciousness and existence are one. I am conscious, I exist. Now, let us see. The opponent is still saying it's non-existent. It's non-existent. So let us see how that is tackled. Verse number 23. Asti tavat swayam nama. Asti tavat swayam nama. Vivada vishayatvatah. Vivada vishayatvatah. Swasminnapi vivadaschet. Swasminnapi vivadaschet. Prativadyatra ko bhavet. प्रतिवाद्यत्र को भवेत् अस्ति तावत् स्वयं नाम विवादाविषयत्वतः स्वस्मिन्नपि विवादश्चेत् प्रतिवाद्यत्र को भवेत्. So it says here, asti tavat swayam nama. So asti tavat swayam nama means the self is. It is indeed. Nama, it is indeed. Swayam asti, the self is. Tavat, tavat means so therefore the self is. Nama, indeed, indeed. Vivada avishayatvatah, and there's no vivada. Vivada means debate. There's no opposition. Vivada avishayatvatah. There's no reason for opposition. Swasmin api vivadaschet. Swasmin, in the self, api, even if, vivadaschet, if there's an argument in the self, prativadyatra ko bhavet, who would be the opponent? Prativadi. Who would be the opponent? Atra, in this debate. Ko bhavet, who would be? So oneself is surely existing. There cannot be any opposition to that. Were it not so, who could be the opponent? So here, imagine this scenario that one person says the self is existing. The self is existent in itself, its consciousness in itself. But the other person says, no, the self is non-existent. Now, if the self is non-existent, that means that person is non-existent. Right? Because if I am saying the self is non-existent, then it means I'm non-existent. And if I, the opponent, say I am non-existent, then there's no opponent. There's no one to argue with. So he says the self cannot be non-existent because otherwise, who's the opponent? By doubting if one exists or not, one is proving the self. Therefore, the self exists, and it is existence. Furthermore, he says, verse number 24, Swasatvatuna kasmai chita, Swasatvatuna kasmai chita, Rochate vibhramam vina, Rochate vibhramam vina, Ata eva shrutir badham, Ata eva shrutir badham, Brute cha sattvavadinaha, Brute cha sattvavadinaha. Swasatvatuna kasmai chita, Rochate vibhramam vina, Ata eva shrutir badham, Brute cha sattvavadinaha. So he says here, swa asattva, one's absence, swa asattva, tu na kasmai chit rochate. Kasmai chit, anyone na rochate, anyone would not like their absence. Vibhramam vina, even through delusion, except through delusion, one would not want one's absence. Ata eva shrutir badham brute. And therefore the Shruti, the Upanishads, they also expose the falsity of whom? Asattvavadinaha, of those who deny the existence of the self. Nobody except through delusion can entertain the idea that he does not exist. So the Shruti thus exposes the falsity of the position of one who denies the existence of the self. So now just think about it. Even in Vyavahara, even in our transactional realm, we always want to exist, isn't it? If we go somewhere and they don't give us any attention, we feel very unnerved by it. We feel very disturbed by it. If we are right in front of a person and they don't acknowledge us, we don't like that. Everywhere we want our presence felt. this feeling of may my presence be felt, may I be known, is because we are existence itself. We are existence itself. That's why we always want to be known. We want to be acknowledged. We want to be appreciated. In every being, these desires are there because our nature is existence. And the one who denies that they exist, they must be under some delusion. Only somebody in some delusion would say, I don't exist, I don't exist. Maybe somebody who is crazy or somebody who has some kind of illness will say, I don't exist. But other than that, nobody would say, I don't exist. Everybody knows that they exist. They exist. And therefore, Shruti, our Upanishads, they falsify, they speak falsely, or they expose the falsity of the ones who say that the self does not exist. When we studied Panchadashi, chapter 2, one of the reasons given that existence is because everything is everything around us is. We say the book is, the pen is, the table is. We don't say it is not, right? We say this is. And even if somebody says existence is not, is there. So therefore, existence is. There's a story of this Zen master, and he wanted to know who of these students are eligible to learn this knowledge. He wanted to know who would be eligible, and there were 3 of them. And he said, I'm going to give you a pile of wood. Now what I want you to do is to find a place to chop the pile of wood where nobody is there. Find a place. And so he gave all of them a pile, and he said, once you find that place, you come back with your wood chopped, and you just chop it in half. That's all I want you to do. So the first student, he went at night when the street was really, really dark, and something like 2:30 in the morning. No cars, no one was there. It was not New York City, it was a different city. New York City, there would be someone there. It was a different city, and no one was there. And he took the wood in the pitch dark, he chopped it. And he brought it back to the teacher. He said, I went to this pitch black street at 2:30 in the morning. That's where I chopped it. Teacher said, okay. The next one said, I want to be extra safe. Anybody can just pop up from nowhere. I'm going to go in a cave, in a dark cave where no one is there, no light, nothing, just me, and I will chop the wood there. And he chopped the wood and he brought it back to the master. He said, here's the wood. Where did you chop it? The master said, in a cave, dark cave. Master said, okay. The third one came back. What happened? He didn't chop the wood. The master said, why didn't you chop the wood? He said, no matter how dark the place was, even if I couldn't see anything, even if I couldn't hear anything, I was still there. And therefore, I could not chop that wood. And the master said, you are eligible for this knowledge. I will teach you because you are attuned to yourself. So see, the self is there. When everything is shut out, even the self is there. And the ones who say it is not there, then they deny their own existence. That's what it says in Taittiriya Upanishad. Let's see now verse number 25. Asad brahmeti ched veda. Asad brahmeti ched veda. Swayameva bhaved asat. Swayameva bhaved asat. Atosya ma bhut vedyatvam. Atosya ma bhut vedyatvam. Swasatvam tvabhyupeyatam. Swasatvam tvabhyupeyatam. Asad brahmeti ched veda. Swayameva bhaved asat. Atosya ma bhut vedyatvam. Swasatvam tvabhyupeyatam. It says, Asad Brahma iti. The one who believes that Brahman is non-existent, Ched Veda, the one who knows or believes Brahman to be that, Swayam Eva Bhavet Asat. That person, Swayam Eva, that being itself becomes Asat, becomes non-existent. Ataha Asya. Therefore, of that truth, Ma Bhut Vedyatvam, let there not be any objectification. Swasatvam Tvab Tu Abhyupeyatam. Your own self now has to be accepted. The one who believes Brahman to be non-existent becomes non-existent himself. It is true that the self can never be an object of knowledge, but you must accept the existence of the self as a fact. So the one who says Brahman doesn't exist, the self doesn't exist, they themselves don't exist. Because the self is you. The self is you. So the one who believes Brahman to be non-existent becomes non-existent. And let there be no objectification of Brahman. That's fine. Brahman cannot be objectified. Accept that. It is not an object of the mind or senses. But the non-objectification of Brahman doesn't mean that it's not there. So the argumenter, the objector said, I cannot see Brahman, so Brahman is not there. What we're saying is we cannot objectify Brahman, but Brahman is ever there. Brahman is ever there as the subject. And you are that Brahman. So therefore, stay rooted in that existence. Stay rooted in that. So through all of these things, it is established then that Brahman is the subject. Brahman is a subject. And it is foolish to think that we need our senses to establish Brahman, because they have their own field of knowing. It is absolutely foolish to say that the mind has to know Brahman, because the mind has its own field of knowing, only thoughts. And both the senses and the mind are illumined by Brahman itself. And furthermore, he says, now I am going to explain to you what is the nature of Brahman. So we know Brahman is existence. We know Brahman is the subject. It is consciousness. It is you. But some may still doubt, what is the nature of Brahman? They might still have this question. So let me explain this to you. Now in verse number 26. Kidrik tarhi chet prichet. Kidrik tarhi ti chet prichet. Idrikta nasti tatrahi. Idrikta nasti tatrahi. Yada nidrik atadrikcha. Yada nidrik atadrikcha. Tatsvarupam vinishchinu. Tatsvarupam vinishchinu. Kidrik tarhi ti chet prichet. Idrikta nasti tatrahi. Yada nidrik atadrikcha. Tatsvarupam vinishchinu. Okay. Kidrik tarhi iti chet prichet. Means, if you ask, kidrik, of what is the property, what is Brahman like, what are its qualities? Kidrik tarhi iti chet prichet. If you ask, idrikta nasti tatra hi, it cannot be described as being this or that. Yat anidrik, it is not this. Atadrik cha, it is not that. It is not this and it is not that. It is not like this, it is not like that. Tat swarupam vinishchinu. Its own nature now should be determined and understood. So if you ask, what sort of thing is the self? Then we reply, self cannot be described as being this or being that. It's not this, it is not that. It cannot be conceived as being like this or being like that. So take it as your own real nature. So now again here, being this implies an object. It's an object that is near, that is in front of us, right? This book, this desk, this computer. We say this when it's an object that is near. And we say that when it's an object which is far, that door, that couch, that chair. But what is the self? It is beyond this and that. It is not this and that. Why? This can become that. Right? This can be moved further and it can become that. And that can become this. Correct? But it is that which never becomes that, which never becomes this. Because it just is. It just is. Now, what is the nature of it? What do you mean by this? And what do you mean by that? You're saying not this, not that. This is an object nearby. That is an object that is a little bit far. But what do you mean by not this, not that? Can you explain? So here, now he's going to explain it. Okay? Verse number 27. Aksharam vishayastvidrika Aksharam vishayastvidrika Parokshastadriguchyate Parokshastadriguchyate Vishayinaksha vishayaha Vishayinaksha vishayaha Svatvanasya parokshata Svatvanasya parokshata Aksharam vishayastvidrika Parokshastadriguchyate Vishayinaksha vishayaha Svatvanasya parokshata. So when he says idrik means like this. When he says like this, it means aksharam vishayaha. It means it's the object of the senses. So when he says this, it means object of the senses. Parokshas tadrik uchyate. When he says tadrik, that, it means it's paroksha. Paroksha means it's remote. It's not directly perceived by the senses. It's indirectly perceived. It's remote. Vishayi na aksha vishayaha. So that which is the vishayi, the subject, can never be the object. Na aksha vishaya. It cannot be the object of the senses. And swatvat. And because the object is the very self, na asya parokshata. It cannot be paroksha or remote. So an object which the senses can perceive can be said to be like this. An object which is beyond the range of sense perception is to be said like that. That which is the subject cannot be an object of the senses, but as it is the very self of everyone, it cannot be said to be beyond the ken of perception. So what does this mean? So here we have what is called pratyaksha. Pratyaksha and paroksha. We know we have 6 means of knowledge, 6 means of knowing. Shad brahmanas. And the first means of knowing something is called pratyaksha. In other words, direct perception. It only means prati-aksha. Prati-aksha means in front of my eyes. So there are some things that I know which I can directly perceive. Like I can directly perceive this computer. So that to me is in front of my eyes. I can directly perceive this book. It's in front of my eyes. I can directly hear someone calling out to me right here. Someone's right here calling out to me, and I can directly hear that. If I taste something, I can directly taste it. I touch something, I can directly touch it. So that which I can directly perceive through, of course, consciousness, through the mind, through the eyes, ears, nose, touch, taste, which is right in front of me, that's called direct perception. That's called pratyaksha. That's called this. When we say that, it means that para-aksha, paroksha, I am seeing it through somebody else's eye. So I'm seeing it remote. Like I hear news. I hear news on CNN or BBC or whatever that there's some kind of rally going on. I'm hearing it, yes, from CNN, and although that news channel might be in front of me, I'm not seeing it directly. I'm hearing about it. I'm hearing about it through somebody else. That is called paroksha. Paroksha, remote, indirect, it's called that. So all our means of knowledge, besides direct perception, which is inference, which is comparison, postulation, absence, and even shabda pramana, or the word, knowing through words or hearing through words which are remote, all of this falls under that. And therefore the self is not this and not also that. More of this we will take up next week. How we will go through each of the inference, we'll go through inference, comparison, postulation, we'll go through all of these to understand why, again, the self cannot be known through this. And then we will come to the conclusion that the self is not this and not that, right? So more of this we will take up next week because it needs more time. But just to summarize today what we've done, Swami Vidyāraṇya ji says that after letting go of the identification of the 5 sheets, what is remaining is that sākṣī, that consciousness. That sākṣī is Brahman. That sākṣī is who you are. And it is not non-existence. If you say it is non-existence, then you don't exist. Then who is my opponent? Opponent is non-existence, right? And so only except through delusion, nobody can entertain the idea that they don't exist. Therefore, one has to exist. The self has to exist. And even the Upanishads say that the ones who deny that Brahman is, they deny their very self. So you say Brahman is not, then I am not. So they deny their very selves. Then of what nature is Brahman? Brahman is neither this, neither that. Neither this meaning it's nothing that can be perceived by the senses through direct perception, and it's not a thing that can be known through inferential cognition. It is beyond the two, right? Okay, so we will stop here and we will take up any questions. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.